Hello everyone, it's great to see you all. It is a pleasure for me to have an opportunity to share with you in this summer course. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Hartanti Sandi Wijayanti. I am a staff of Department of Nutrition Science, Faculty of Medicine, Diponegoro University, Indonesia. In this session, I would like to share with you about nutritional assessment, dietary methods, and its implementation in community setting in stunting case studies. Okay, let's start the presentation. First, let me explain about the description of this lecture. In this session, we will learn about dietary assessment and its application on stunting case studies. Because stunting is prevalent among children below 2 years old, thus in this session, we will learn particularly about dietary assessment on children aged 0 to 23 months old. What is the relevance? Stunting is strongly related to dietary intake. Poor dietary intake is one of the determinants of the stunting. So, learning on how to measure dietary intake is required in understanding stunting problem and its determinant. We have some learning objectives in this lecture. First, to know the definition of dietary assessment. Second, know the stages of dietary assessment, including method of collecting data on food intake. And third, know how to select an appropriate dietary method. Fourth, know how to measure infant and young child feeding practices. And fifth, know some studies in Indonesia related to dietary intake, infant and young child feeding practice, especially in coastal area. This is the outline of the lecture. First is I'll explain about dietary assessment definition, and then I will explain about the stages of dietary assessment, including method of collecting data on food intakes, and then I'll explain about selecting an appropriate method. After that, I will also explain about measurement of infant and young child feeding practices. And last but not least, I will also share about some studies in Indonesia related to dietary intake, infant and young child feeding practices, and stunting. What is dietary assessment? Dietary assessment is an evaluation of food and nutrient intake and dietary pattern of an individual or individuals in the household or population group over time. So we know that dietary assessment can be used for measuring dietary intake both in an individual or in a group, in a household, or in a community. And dietary assessment involves the collection of information on food and drink consumed over a specific time that is coded and processed to compute intakes of energy, nutrients, and other dietary constituents using food composition tables. So by this definition, we know that dietary assessment can be consist of some stages. First is collecting information on food and drink consumed, then calculating the nutrient intakes, and then evaluating the nutrient intake, whether it is adequate or not. If we talk about nutrition deficiency usually happen in stages like in this table. First is dietary inadequacy, means that someone have inadequate diet. If it is happen continuously, then tissue store or reserve will decline, and also level of body fluid will also decline. After that, functional level in tissues will decrease, and also the activity of nutrient-dependent enzyme will decrease. Then, if nutritional deficiency become more severe, functional change can be happen, and clinical symptoms and also anatomical signs may emerge. We can see here that dietary inadequacy can be measured by using dietary assessment. It means when we do dietary assessment or we measure dietary inadequacy, we detect the nutrition deficiency in very early stage. And if we can detect the nutrition deficiency from the fairly early stage, we can prevent it from become more severe. Next, we will learn about stages of dietary assessment. One of the purposes of having dietary assessment is to evaluate nutrient adequacy or to relate between foods and nutrients and health outcomes. We can see here that dietary assessment consists of some stages. First is collecting data on food intake, and then calculating nutrient intake using relevant food composition data, and then evaluating nutrient adequacy or relation between foods and nutrient and health outcomes. For collecting data on food intake, there are some commonly methods used such as semi-quantitative food frequency questionnaire, 24-hour food recall, estimated food record, and weight food record. For calculating nutrient intakes, food composition data that commonly used in Indonesia is Indonesian Food Composition Table or Tabel Komposisi Pangan Indonesia, and we usually use software NutriSurvey. For evaluating nutrient adequacy, we have to compare between nutrient intake and nutrient requirement. And we can compare nutrient intake with nutrient reference levels. We can use EAR or estimated average requirement or RDI, recommended dietary intake. I have mentioned earlier that we have some method that usually used in collecting data on food intake. First is food frequency questionnaire or semi-quantitative food frequency questionnaire, and then 24-hour food recall, estimated food record, and weight food record. We will learn those methods one by one. First, we will learn about food frequency questionnaire or FFQ and semi-quantitative food frequency questionnaire or SQFFQ. FFQ is designed to capture habitual dietary intake. It includes defined list of foods and drinks in which participants are asked to indicate their typical frequency of consumption over a specific period in the past. It is originally designed to provide descriptive qualitative information about usual food consumption pattern, and the frequency of use response categories may be daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly, depending on the study objective. The number of food and drinks items and scope varies depends on the objective of the questionnaire. It can be consist of a few questions on selected items such as only 20 items, or it can also be consist of fully comprehensive list of items such as consist of 200 items or more. With the addition of portion size estimate, it becomes semi-quantitative. So the difference between FFQ and SQFFQ is in SQFFQ we have a portion size estimate, and by having portion size estimate, it is allowing the derivation of energy and selected nutrient intake. FFQ has a plus and minus. The plus is the burden of study participant is lower than for other method, but the minus, the approach challenges the participant with rather complex cognitive tasks such as recall over several weeks or months, and also estimating an average intake over time. It is quite complex, and then the longer and the complex the questionnaire, it will increase the burden. Besides that, developing an FFQ also requires considerably time and resource compared to other methods, because we have to develop a FFQ that consists of population-specific food lists, and then we also have to test and validate the questionnaire before we can use it. The second method is 24-hour food recall. It captures actual dietary intake of individual over a 24-hour period. It includes detailed description of the food and beverage consumed, the amount of the portion size, the brand if it is available, and also the preparation, for example, the cooking method, addition of fat, or recipe ingredients. In this method, participants are asked a series of structured but open-ended, non-leading questions about each food and beverage consumed over 24-hour period. Usually midnight to midnight of the previous day or from the previous 24 hours from the time the recall is started if it is appropriate. In this method, we usually use the multiple pass 24-hour recall. It means it consists of several passes, 4 passes, and it is designed to add memory. In the first pass, we ask and record a complete list of all foods and beverages consumed during the preceding day. So we ask the participant what food and beverage consumed from they wake up until they sleep at night. If they wake up in the midnight and they eat some foods or beverage, then we also record that foods or beverage. And the second pass, we ask the detailed description of each food and beverage consumed, including cooking method and branding. In the third pass, we estimate the amount of each food and beverage item consumed, generally on household measures. And the last pass, we review the recall to ensure that all items, including supplement, have been recorded correctly. In this method, to estimate the amount, it's better to use some aids such as food models or photographs. Who is the participant on this method? The participant can be the subject, their parents, or their caretaker. For example, in the stunting case, if our subject is children aged 6 to 23 months, we can interview the children. So we can ask their parents or the caretakers who are responsible to prepare the food. It can also be used in the other methods such as food frequency questionnaire or other. We can ask their parents or the caretakers if the subject can be interviewed. Ideally, the recall day is unannounced because it can reduce the likelihood of change in habitual dietary intake. If we announce the day when we will recall, the subject may change the dietary intake because they want to look good. For example, they want the investigator think that they eat healthy food, for example, like that. And how many days that we need in performing 24-hour food recall, it depends on the objective. Single 24-hour recall is not sufficient to describe usual intake of food and nutrition. We have to do multiple 24-hour food recall on the same individual over several days to estimate usual intake. But if our purpose is to measure the mean nutrient intake in a group or a population, we can do multiple single day recalls on different individuals. The 24-hour recall should be conducted in the respondent home whenever possible. Why? Because when we do recall in the respondent home, it can encourage participation because of the familiar environment, and it also can improve the recall of food consumed and facilitate calibration of local household utensils by the interviewer. The success of 24-hour food recall depends on some factors such as the subject memory, and then the ability of the subject to convey accurate estimate of portion size consumed, the degree of motivation of respondent, and also the persistence of the interviewer. So it needs both from subject side and interviewer side. The next method is estimated food record. Food records are intended to be completed by study participants at the time of consumption in a real time, not from memory, for a specific period of time. The respondent is asked to record at the time of consumption all food and beverage eaten in household measures for a specific time period. Detailed description of all foods and beverage and their method of preparation and cooking are also recorded, and the food portion size can be estimated by the respondent in a variety of ways. First, they can use standard household measuring cups and spoon, or they can also measure it with a ruler, for example, for meat or cake, and they also use count, for example, for eggs or bread slice. And then investigator convert the portion size to weight equivalent. The recording can take place from 1 to several consecutive or non-consecutive days, but 3 to 7 consecutive days is the most widely used recording period for the purpose of estimating usual intake. And the estimated food record also have plus and minus. The plus is the estimation of portion size, reduced burden for participants, but is less precise compared to weight food records. But the minus, error may arise because the respondent may fail to quantify portion size correctly. The other method that commonly used is weight food record. It is same with estimated food record, but in estimated food record, the portion is estimated, but in the weight food record, the portion is weighed. So this is the most precise method, in which subjects or parents or caretaker is instructed to weight all food and beverage consumed by the subject during specific time period, and detailed description of all foods and beverage and their method of preparation and cooking are also recorded. And for this method, respondent must be motivated, numerate, and literate. But the weakness is, respondent might change their usual eating pattern to simplify the measuring or weighing process or to impress the investigator. And the burden for respondent is tend to high because weighing all food is quite tedious, so yeah, it increases the burden. That is the minus of this method. After collecting data on food consumption, the next step is calculating nutrient intake by using food composition data. In Indonesia, the food composition data that commonly used is Indonesian Food Composition Table or Tabel Komposisi Pangan Indonesia. The latest version is in 2017. It is consists of several database that is compiled become one. And we also usually use software NutriSurvey that also consists of several database, and we can also add a food in the NutriSurvey, so we can update the data time by time. Regarding food composition data, it's important to have valid and up-to-date food composition table, and also it is important to have available population appropriate recipes and food list and also portion size, because each population might have different recipes and also different portion size, so it is better to have the specific one. Why? Because it might affect on the nutrient intake that is contained in the food and also in the beverage. After calculating nutrient intake from food and beverage that has been consumed, the next step is evaluating nutrient adequacy. For evaluating nutrient adequacy, we have to compare between nutrient intake and nutrient requirement. And how do we know how much is the nutrient requirement? We can use nutrient reference level. The nutrient reference level that commonly used is EAR, or estimated average requirement, and RDI, or recommended dietary intake. What is EAR? EAR is the amount of nutrient that is estimated to meet the nutrient requirement of half-healthy individuals in a life stage and age group. And what is RDI? RDI is the daily nutrient intake which meets the nutrient requirements of almost all or 97.5 apparently individuals in an age and sex-specific population group, or it is about 2 standard deviations above EAR for each nutrient. So the RDA value is higher than EAR because EAR is only meet the nutrient requirement for only half healthy individuals, but the RDI is the value and that meet the nutrient requirements of almost all or 97.5% apparently individuals. And how to use this reference level? The use is different between use for individual and use for groups. For use for individual, for estimated average requirement, estimated average requirement can be used for assess probability that usual intake is inadequate. If someone have intake that is below estimated average requirement, it means that this individual have higher probability that the intake is inadequate. And if someone have intake that is above the RDI, it means that this individual has a low probability of inadequacy. And how to use it for group? Estimated average requirement can be used to assess prevalence of inadequate intake within a group. The prevalence can be calculating for how many people in the group that have nutrient intake below EAR cut point. But RDI should not be used for group because it can be overestimate the number of person that have inadequate intake. Okay, next we will learn about how to select an appropriate method. There are some factors that have to be considered before we selecting an appropriate method. The objective of the study, the characteristic of the study group and setting, the respondent burden, and also available resources. The objective of the study. It depends on what is the objective that we have. If we want to know the usual intake of an individual, so we have to do multiple days 24-hour food recall or records. It is different if we want to know the mean intake of a group. We need to do a single 24-hour recall for each individual in a group, and we have to consider that the data collection is performed in all day in the week representatively. Then the second, we have also need to consider the characteristic of the study group and setting. If our subject is illiterate and less numerate, so it is better we collect the data by interviewing using 24-hour food recall. It is different if our subject is literate, numerate, and have high motivation, we can use weight food record, for example. And we also have to consider respondent burden. We can choose a method that has less respondent burden to increase the participation if we need the high number of subjects. And we also have to consider available resources because different methods have different resources. For example, if we want to use weight food record, so we have to have a weight scale, for example. And we have to consider what is the resource available, what can we do for collecting the data. This is the detailed explanation about what method should be used in each different objective. For example, if our objective is to know the mean nutrient intake of a group, the preferred approach is a single 24-hour recall or single weight or estimated record with a large number of subjects and adequate presentation of all days of the week. But if our objective is to know proportion of population at risk, the preferred approach is replicate observation on each individual or subsample using 24-hour recalls or weight or estimated one-day food record. But if our objective is to know usual intakes of nutrient in individuals for ranking within a group, the preferred approach is multiple replicate of 24-hour recall or food records, or we can also use a semi-quantitative food frequency questionnaire. And if our objective is to know usual intake of food or nutrient in individual for counseling, or for correlation or regression analysis, even larger number of recalls or record for each individual. Alternatively, a SMIC quantitative food frequency questionnaire or a dietary history can be used. Now we will learn about measurement of infant and young child feeding. Why it is important? Because growth faltering and also stunting is most pronounced during the first 20 months of life. Optimal feeding practice during this age can reduce the risk of stunting. WHO has developed indicators and tools to measure infant and young child feeding practices. The indicator and tools has been developed many years ago, but WHO has new publication in 2021 about the update indicators on infant and young child feeding practice. The example questionnaire has been developed and the questions are broken down into 4 sections. First is question about feeding immediately after birth, then question about current breast and bottle feeding. Third is question about liquids, and fourth question about semi-solid and solid food. These are some indicators about infant and young child feeding that has been developed by WHO. First is breastfeeding indicators. There are 6 indicators. First is ever breastfed. The second is early initiation of breastfeeding. Third is exclusively breastfed from the first 2 days after birth. 4 is exclusive breastfeeding under 6 months. 5, mixed milk feeding under 6 months. And 6, continued breastfeeding 12 to 23 months. And what is the definition? Ever breastfed is percentage of children born in the last 24 months who were ever breastfed. Early initiation of breastfeeding is percentage of children born in the last 24 months who were put to the breast within 1 hour of birth. Exclusively breastfed from the first 2 days after birth is percentage of children born in the last 24 months who were fed exclusively with breast milk from the first 2 days after birth. Exclusive breastfeeding under 6 months is percentage of infants 0 to 5 months of age who were fed exclusively with breast milk during the previous day. Mixed milk feeding under 6 months is percentage of infants 0 to 5 months of age who were fed formula and or animal milk in addition to breast milk during the previous day. And continued breastfeeding 12 to 23 months is percentage of children 12 to 23 months of age who were fed breast milk during the previous days. So we can see here to assess the exclusive breastfeeding, mixed milk feeding, and continued breastfeeding. The question is to ask about what is consumed the previous days. So it's like in the 24-hour recall. The second indicators of infant and young child feeding is complementary feeding indicators. There are 9 indicators of complementary feeding. First is introduction of solid, semi-solid, or soft food 6 to 8 months. Then minimum dietary diversity 6 to 23 months. Minimum milk frequency 6 to 23 months. Minimum milk feeding frequency for non-breastfeed children 6 to 23 months. Minimum acceptable diet 6 to 23 months. Egg and or flesh food consumption 6 to 23 months. Sweet beverage consumption 6 to 23 months, unhealthy food consumption 6 to 23 months, and zero vegetable or fruit consumption 6 to 23 months. Why egg and or flesh food consumption become one of indicators? Because diet like egg and or flesh food are less likely to meet nutrient intake for infant and young child. And why sweet beverage consumption become one of indicators? Because intake of sweet beverage is associated with increase with foreline and BMI score, and also intake of sweet beverage associated with increased obesity risk in the children. And then why unhealthy food consumption become one of indicator? because unhealthy foods displace nutritious food and establish dietary preference that persists throughout childhood and into adulthood. And why low vegetable or fruit consumption become one of indicator, because it is associated with an increased risk of non-communicable diseases. And then from the definition, we can see here that all of these indicator was collected uh, by having information about what is food and drinks consumed during the previous day. Besides breastfeeding indicators and also complementary feeding indicators, WHO also have two other indicators, first is bottle feeding 0 to 23 months and infant feeding area graphs. The definition is bottle feeding 0 to 23 months is the percentage of children 0 to 23 months of age who were fed from a bottle with nipple during the previous day, and infant feeding area graph is the percentage of infant 0 to 5 months of age who were fed exclusively with breast milk and water only, breast milk and non-milk liquid, breast milk and animal milk or formula, breast milk and complementary foods, and not breastfed during the previous day. From all of infant and young child feeding indicators developed by WHO, I want to explain more about three indicators: minimum dietary diversity, minimum meal frequency, and minimum acceptable diet. Why minimum dietary diversity is important? Because food group diversity is associated with improved linear growth in young children. A diet lacking in diversity increases the risk of micronutrient deficiency and may affect on children's physical and cognitive development. A study shows that little or no consumption of nutrient-dense food like eggs, dairy, fruit, and vegetable between 6 to 3 months old was associated with stunting. So as an indicator, for minimum dietary diversity is consume at least 5 out of 8 defined food groups during the previous day. This indicator has been changed from the previous indicator of MDD. The previous indicator is consume at least 4 out of 7 defined food groups. The difference is because in this current indicator, we include breast milk as one of the food group. But in the previous indicator, breast milk is not included as one of the food group. So children should consume at least 5 out of 8 defined food group. And what is the 8 defined food group? The 8 defined food group is breast milk, green roots, tubers and plantains, pulses, nuts and seeds, dairy product, flesh food, eggs, vitamin A rich fruit and vegetable, and other fruit and vegetables. The next indicator of infant and young child feeding that I want to explain more is about minimum meal frequency. WHO recommend that breastfed infant aged 6 to 8 months to eat 2 to 3 times per day, and for infant or child aged 6 to 23 months should eat 3 to 4 times per day with additional nutritious snack offered 1 to 2 times per day. And for non-breastfeed child should eat 4 to 5 meals per day. And why minimum meal frequency is important? Because feeding meals or snack less frequently than recommended may compromise the total energy and micronutrient intake, and it can affect on growth faltering, stunting, and micronutrient deficiencies. So the indicators is the minimum number of time of feeding of solid or semi-solid or soft food is defined as 2 times for breastfed infant at 6 to 8 months and 3 times for breastfed infant at 6 to 23 months. Whether for non-breastfed infant or child, the minimum is for feeding of solid, semi-solid or soft food or milk feeds, and at least one of the 4 feeds must be a solid, semi-solid or soft feed. The other complementary feeding indicators that I want to explain is minimum acceptable diet or MAD. What is the rationale? WHO recommend that children aged 6 to 23 months old be fed meals at an appropriate frequency and in a sufficient variety. This indicator, the MAD, is combined information of minimum dietary diversity and minimum meal frequency. And the minimum acceptable diet is defined as for breastfed children receiving at least the minimum dietary diversity and minimum meal frequency for their age during the previous day. And for non-breastfed children, receiving at least the minimum dietary diversity and minimum meal frequency for their age during the previous day, as well as at least 2 milk feeds. Next, we will learn some studies in Indonesia related to dietary intake, infant and young child feeding practices, and stunting. In this session, I will share to you a 4 study that is conducted in Indonesia in a district that has a coastal area. First is study by Gibson with the title Dietary Diversity and Fish Consumption of Mothers and Their Children in Fisher Household in Komodo District, Eastern Indonesia. And next, I will also share to you the other study by Fahmida about effect of an integrated package of nutrition behavior change interventions on infant and young child feeding practices and child growth from birth to 18 months, cohort evaluation of the Baduta cluster randomized control trial in East Java, Indonesia. And next also we have study by Ahmad with the title Complementary Feeding Practices and Nutritional Status of Children 6 to 23 months old, a formative study in Aceh, Indonesia. And last, I will share to you a study by Nur Hayati about dietary diversity, vitamin D intake, and childhood stunting, a case control in Bantul, Indonesia. I tried to search the newest publication, and I hope this will give you some description about what is happening in coastal area in Indonesia and how they perform the study related to dietary intake, infant and young child feeding, and also stunting. Okay, we will discuss one by one. The first study that I will share to you is dietary diversity and fish consumption of mothers and their children in fisher households in Komodo District, Eastern Indonesia. So the study is conducted in Komodo District, East Nusa Tenggara Province, Indonesia. East Nusa Tenggara Province is the province that has highest rate of household poverty in Indonesia, the third highest rate, in which 22.61% of households living below the poverty line. This province also has a very high rate of stunting. Half of the children is stunting, 51.73%. And the communities that is selected in the study is the community that engage in various small-scale fisheries livelihood activity, including capture fisheries, collection and trade, both local and export markets, and post-harvest processing. This study is mixed method case study, and the objective of the study is to explore of the interplaying factors leading to food and nutrition insecurity in three marine-dependent coastal communities, focusing on the consumption pathway, that is the contribution of fish to the diets and nutrition of women and children. This study used several methods for collecting information on food consumption by using questionnaire and also interview and focus group discussion. In the questionnaire, they asked about the consumption of foods and beverages using the 24-hour recall method, and they also collect information about feeding practices, including breastfeeding, age at introduction of complementary food, and consumption of food and beverages using the 24-hour recall method. data was collected twice in the wet season and also during dry season. Why? To capture seasonal variation in access to, availability of, and consumption of food. They also use interview and focus group discussion, identification of season and associated change or differences in livelihood activities, food and water availability, and also health and nutrition issues. Also, historical and contemporary food consumption and meal pattern, issues with food access including taboos or intra-household distribution practices, child feeding practices, perception and understanding of healthy food. They also perform data analysis on maternal and child dietary diversity, data on mother and child food and beverage consumption was collected using the model developed by FAO and WHO, and they use threshold the consumption at least 5 of 10 food group for women to be categorized as have a good dietary diversity, and at least 4 of 7 food group for children to be categorized as have a good dietary diversity. This study shows that fish was the most frequently consumed animal source food by mothers and children, in which 90% of mothers consume fish frequently, both during wet and dry season, and for children, about 57% consume fish during wet season, and about 79% eat fish frequently during dry season. And fish was mostly consumed fresh. However, the consumption of fish was low among infants, only 12.5% during the wet season, and only 20% of infants during dry season. We can see from the table 3, we can see here that the dietary diversity was higher during dry season than during wet season. And we can see here that children at 6 to 11 months, 0% who have dietary diversity above the threshold. Means that all the children at 6 to 11 months have low dietary diversity. And we can also see here that the oldest the age of children, the higher the dietary diversity. And then we can see from the table 4, there are some explanatory factors of child having adequate dietary diversity, such as child's age, child's consumption of fish, mother's dietary diversity, and also seasons. So we know that consumption of fish is one of explanatory factor of adequate dietary diversity, and it might explain why children aged 6 to 11 months has a low dietary diversity, because they consume fish rarely. And then the study found that the consumption of fish were driven by taboos. Mothers did not give infants and younger children fish or sea urchins because they were believed to cause allergies or stomach upset. And breastfeeding women were prescribed from eating parrotfish and rabbitfish in addition to sea urchins and shellfish because they were said to cause upset stomach in the breastfed child. And consumption of white snapper by the mothers was believed to cause a white growth in the infant mouths. And pregnant women were prescribed from eating common and long spin sea urchin for fear it will cause the uterine bleeding. And mothers reported that they delayed the introduction of taboo species until the child had kissed breastfeeding, could eat unmasked rice, and had started walking. Yeah, it might explain why the infant have low dietary diversity. And it means that maybe education or socialization is required. So infant and young child can have better dietary diversity by consuming fish. The next study I want to share is an article about effect on an integrated package of nutrition behavior change interventions on infant and young child feeding practices and child growth from birth to 18 months cohort evaluation of the Baduta cluster randomized control trial in East Java, Indonesia. So the study objective is to assess the effectiveness of the Baduta program in improving IYCF practices, growth, and anemia of children under 2 years of age. The study used cluster randomized cohort trial that is conducted in 2 districts, Sidoarjo District and Malang District, East Java, and 6 sub-districts representing both urban and rural areas were randomly assigned to either intervention or comparison group. And pregnant women were recruited during the third trimester of pregnancy and follow up until 18 months postpartum. There were 2 types of intervention, health system strengthening and behavioral change intervention. In health system strengthening, they do something about baby-friendly hospital initiative, and also they do training of village midwife, health worker, and position educators. And on behavioral change intervention, they have EMO-DEMOS intervention package, national television campaign, and promotion of Nazava water filter. I will share to you all articles that I discussed in this lecture, so you can read it in detail. So how they collected information on child feeding practices and dietary data? For child feeding practices, they use a standard questionnaire on breastfeeding and complementary feeding practices, following the guideline by WHO, and it was administered soon after birth, every month in the first 6 months, and at 3-monthly intervals until 18 months. And for dietary data, they use a 4-pass 24-hour dietary recall. If you remember that I have mentioned earlier, there is a method that is called multi-pass 24-hour dietary recall, or a 4-pass 24 dietary recall, and this study used this method, and the recall was performed 3 times when child was 6 to 8 months of age, and then when child was 9 to 11 months of age, and when the child was 16 to 18 months of age. For each target group and data collection period, 24 hours were proportionally collected on all days of the week, and in subsample of children, non-consecutive day repeat 24 hours, 40 children per intervention group per data collection period was collected. And portion size were weighed using food scale or estimated by using food photograph. So this can improve the estimation of portion size correctly. And how was the result of the study? We can see here in table 5 that this study also analyzed the effect of intervention on minimum meal frequency, minimum dietary diversity score, and also minimum acceptable diet. We can see here that generally the intervention group had higher minimum meal frequency, dietary diversity score, and also minimum acceptable diet. It means that the intervention had successfully improved the dietary practice or infant and young child feeding practice, especially related to these 3 indicators. But we can also see from the table 6 that there was no difference between intervention and comparison group on Langford HGH score, and also anemia status, and also the stunting prevalence. So it means that this intervention or this program still cannot improve the growth significantly. Yeah, we know that solving the stunting problem is not an easy task. The other study that I want to share is an article with the title Complementary Feeding Practices and Nutritional Status of Children 6 to 23 months, a formative study in Aceh, Indonesia. So the study objective is to analyze the complementary feeding practices and nutritional status of children aged 6 to 23 months. The study was a cross-sectional study that is conducted in 3 sub-districts in Aceh Besar District, with the total subject was 392 children aged 6 to 23 months. And how they measure the complementary feeding practice? They adopted the following recommendation of WHO and Pan American Health Organization, WHO, and UNICEF for infant and young child feeding. For information about early breastfeeding initiation, exclusive breastfeeding, and prolonged breastfeeding, they use interview using structured questionnaire, and they also measure the minimum dietary diversity, minimum meal frequency, and also minimum acceptable diet. For this information, or for example, for minimum dietary diversity, it was collected by calculating the mean of 3 repeated 24-hour recall. And dietary diversity was categorized good when they eat 4 out of 7 food group. Besides that, they also measure about iron rich or iron fortified and vitamin A rich green leaf and orange vegetable consumption. And what is the result of the study? We can see here from the table 3 that the only indicators related to stunting is fortified food consumption in the last 3 months, in which the prevalence of stunting is higher among those who did not consume fortified food in the last 3 months. One of the problem in complementary feeding in Indonesia is that the complementary food that is provided for the children may lack of micronutrient. So it means that fortified food may be beneficial for solving stunting because can add the micronutrient in the food consumed by the child. The other article that I want to discuss with you is an article with the title Dietary Diversity, Vitamin D Intake, and Childhood Stunting, a case control study in Bantul, Indonesia. The study objective was to examine the association between dietary diversity and vitamin D intake with stunting in children aged 6 to 23 months. The study was a case control study that was conducted in Bantul District, Yogyakarta Special Region, Indonesia. The number of subjects was 79 children aged 6 to 23 months for each group, or a total of 158 children. And how they measure the dietary intake? They use a semi-quantitative food frequency questionnaire, or SQFFQ, with a 3-month time frame. I have mentioned earlier that we have several methods for collecting dietary intake, such as 24-hour recall and SQFFQ. The previous article that I shared to you used 24-hour recall, but this study using semi-quantitative food frequency questionnaire. And a minimum of 10 grams per day was considered as consumption of each food item. And this article defined dietary diversity as the consumption of at least 4 food groups of a total 7 food group. So all the article that I share here still use the cutoff 4 from 7 food group, but the current WHO guideline have used 5 out of 8 food group, including breastfeeding. And in the study, the intake of vitamin D and other nutrients was assessed using the NutriSurvey Indonesia software. Also, as I mentioned earlier, that NutriSurvey was the software that commonly used for calculating nutrient intake. And nutrient intake was compared to the recommended dietary allowance of Indonesia population, and they use cutoff of 80%. In this study, the factors that were found to have association with stunting are vitamin D intake from complementary food and dietary diversity, in which those who have vitamin D intake below 80% of RDA and those who have low dietary diversity had higher risk of stunting. So this is the summary of this lecture. First, dietary assessment involves the collection of information on foods and drinks consumption, calculation of nutrient intake, and evaluation of food and nutrient intakes. Second, some dietary methods that are commonly used are 24-hour food record, SQFFU, estimated food record, and weight food record. And on selecting the dietary method, we have to consider the objective of the study, characteristic of study group and settings, respondent burden, and also available resources. And fourth, the measurement of infant and young child feeding practices can be used in study about stunting and its determinant, especially that focus on food consumption. For example, we can use dietary diversity score, minimum meal frequency, or minimum acceptable diet. This is some reference that I use in this lecture. I will provide this reference for you as reading material. That's all from me. Thank you.